All right, so we are live. Good morning, John. I'm Kate Howe, co-founder of Postcards for Parents, and you are?
I am John Stewart. I'm a clinical psychologist and the proud clinical director for Postcards for Parents.
Yeah, great to be back with you here this week. And today we're taking a little bit of a break from specifically talking about kids and their kind of emotions and their development. And we're going to focus a little bit more on parents. And we're going to wrap it all around at the end. But basically, spoiler alert is that the parents' emotions have a big effect on the kids. That's why we're talking about this. Am I correct?
You're absolutely correct from my perspective. You know that as well as I do, Kate.
Yeah.
And that's a difficult reality to embrace because, being a parent, just running a household, making a living. I mean, there's a lot on a parent's plate. So now we're telling them, and you also have to do it in a way where you don't have too many feelings that are going to be.
Yes, you're right.
Be gentle with yourself as you listen to them. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be perfect.
It's true. It's a lot. And it's let me just start with something that I was interested to learn from you, which was that when families come in to see you and they're sort of experiencing some kind of issue with their kid, you will take a step back and say, like, well, I need to look at the whole family, not just the child. So can you kind of explain a little bit of that background?
Yeah, I mean, I think that for a lot of different reasons, parents come in to see somebody like me when they've tried a number of different things. They're not knocking on my door first time that they've had some difficult issue or some concern around their kids. They've often tried a lot of things. And I think that sometimes parents end up at my door because they've lost faith in themselves and they believe, oh God, somebody else has got to figure this out. And when they come into a clinical practice such as mine that has a heavy focus on the role of the world, the relational world around the child as a determinant of how the child is doing, they're not always excited about the fact that I'm saying, no, wait, you come back in here. I'm not going to fix your kid. I can't fix your kid. I need your help. And your kid's probably not so broken in the first place, but may be responding to a range of things. And so I think, if we use a kind of a gardening metaphor, if the plant is not doing great, you look at the soil, you look at how much water it's getting, how much sunshine, you look at the environment around it. How is that supporting the plant? And so from my perspective, it is rarely a good idea to involve kids in individual therapy without a heavy focus on understanding what is the environment in which the child is growing.
Okay. And so so it sort of kind of happens in families that people can get into unhealthy or unhappy patterns, right? So it's not like anybody is necessarily, doing anything wrong. It's just the way that it's working together and then feeding off of each other kind of gets into this place where nobody wants to be. Can you talk a little bit about how, I don't know if there are like different categories of what that can look like, but like how do these, how do some of these dynamics start? And particularly, I mean, we're talking about when parents are triggered, parents kind of identifying their triggers and then working on those. So what are some kind of ways that parents' reactiveness causes issues with their kids?
Some categories, Kate. I mean, I think that there are a number of different things that can play in the background that can make it so that parents are less effective in their response to their kids' emotional needs, their developmental needs. I think one of the variables is temperamental match between parent and child. And that's a very real factor. If you have a child who's kind of high energy and passionate and maybe even a little impulsive because of those things, and you've got a parent who is more thoughtful, a little more reserved, a little more operates from within themselves versus putting things out, well, those matches can really create a dilemma. And you'll oftentimes have kids who will have a temperamental alignment with one parent and not so much with the other parent. So temperamental alignment is one of the variables that can play out in a way that's problematic for the relationship between a parent and a child. I also think that, just the environment in which the child is operating. I mean, I look at this last year with COVID, where families have, been cloistered. They're stuck together, and that just the overall stress associated with living through a pandemic, and those are factors that are going to make parents a little less able to absorb some of their kids' emotional responses in a way that allows the child to actually kind of be held emotionally by the parent as they work through it. Where if we're not in good shape, I don't know if I've ever said this before, but I'm a type 1 diabetic. And if my blood sugar is low, I'm going to be more emotionally reactive. And my wife and kids would even say, Dad or John, do you want some juice? Which was a code for, oh my goodness, you're being grouchy or you're being reactive. We all have, if we don't sleep well, we're worried about our parents, or there's just all those factors that play a part in how flexible and resilient we are in providing what clinically is sometimes referred to as a holding environment for the child's emotions.
So that's interesting. So the picture that I'm getting from what you're saying is that we can't really expect our kids to kind of understand all that's going on in our background, right? So if we have a deadline or our blood sugar is low or we're getting stressed from, the landlord or the boss or whatever, I know that I sometimes want to be like, just back off. Like, I've got a lot going on, but to them, that's not reality, right? So that's,
our kids are egocentric, like a man drowning in the water is egocentric.
Okay, say more.
They don't, they don't know what to do. And our request to them, I think one of the most disappointing and important things for parents to understand is that when kids recognize that parents are not at their best, like when kids have a sick parent, particularly a sick mom, it can be startling how lacking in empathy they can be in response to that. Because what's happening in them is they're seeing something's different and they're getting apprehensive. Apprehension doesn't bring forth the empathy and the compassion that we wish it would. It's more of a worried kind of, how's this going to affect me?
Yeah. I can remember always when we were packing up to go on car trips, like to visit the grandparents, and we're stressed running around the house, and it always takes longer than we wanted. And we thought, and we would just be like, can't you just be good? Can't you just be patient? Can't you just understand what's going on? And no, it was like they were worse than any other time when we needed them to be good. And I think, so I hear what you're saying is they can't, and they're really going to feed off of our stress when we're stressed.
And there are even those they talk about mirror neurons in the brain when we or our just inherent tendency to reflect back to others what we're getting from them emotionally. And when kids see us ramp up, they ramp up. Now, some kids ramp up and act out. Other kids ramp up and internalize. And so it's
one is obviously easier to deal with as a parent. Is one reaction, better or worse for the kids?
I would say that the good news about the kids who act out is that they're struggling. Internalize are oftentimes a little more difficult to get to, and you're going to have to use different strategies for each of those.
But they might not cause a counter reaction in their parent in the same way. So
that
might be good sometimes.
Well, that is good, but then they are left alone with their own emotion in a way that we may not want them to be left alone with it.
Got it. So do you have any, what do you do in that situation? Like, life can be stressful and parents boil over as well. So, if you can't manage it by saying like, I really need your help, what do you do?
Yeah. Well, I think that, you set realistic expectations for both yourself and your kids. And I mean, and it may be that if you've got somebody else there, you've got a partner there, or even a friend there, a grandparent, you may need to go take 10 minutes, take some time out. If you're not a smoker, take it up, go out.
Don't do my husband.
I'm absolutely teasing, but I mean, I do think that I've often thought about watching smokers. They have this sense of entitlement to take, 7 minutes to go and get their nicotine dose and then come back. I'm teasing. I'm not suggesting that, but I think that we do oftentimes need to be able to step away. If we can't step away, then sometimes what we can do is choose what emotion we want to express. Do I want to express anger and irritation? Because if I express that one, I'm likely to get it back. Or do I want to just sit down and say, I'm so tired? Oh, and a more gentle response to this thing that's not expressing a kind of disapproval of the child's. More your struggle with the moment. We've got to get on the road within the next hour. I can't get all this stuff done. You just sit down on the steps, and you might even say, you could even say, could you come just give me a hug for a minute? So not will you comply, will you do what you do? There are different ways in which to make the dance in those moments not turn into something that's either transactional or really kind of an aggressive interaction.
And transactional might be like, I'll give you a cookie, I'll give you screen time, I'll give you, yeah. I mean, along those lines, I feel like something that has sometimes prevented just like a blow up is saying, thank you so much for being patient. I really notice how hard you're working, just kind of like attaching them a little bit of, Yeah,
just a little bit of acknowledgement, recognition. You express that because they're actually, Ross Greene's ideas, the explosive child and a bunch of other things, collaborative problem solving. But one of Greene's greatest contributions is just a fundamental expression of the fact that kids are doing the best they know how. And there are certain skills they don't have. If we talk about those skills that they're lacking as aspects of their character that's lacking, all that does is demoralize kids. It does. You can talk about it like a skill. Sweetie, you haven't quite figured out. You will. You haven't quite figured out how, when mom gets stressed, how to kind of deal with me or help me out. Figure it out. I know it's not easy. That just framing things with a sense of hope and real recognition that the child is doing the best they know how, even though they don't feel like it.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, so those are like momentary kind of like high stress moments. But what about when a child is triggering something that is like, from the parent's own past? Talk about how that dynamic happens.
Yeah. And that's a big one, and it's a really important one. It's a deep one. And I think it's one of the great opportunities about having children is we do get to go back and kind of re-experience our own childhood. It brings up a lot of memories. It brings up a lot. You hear. I remember this as a young dad. My mom, may she rest in peace, she did a lot of things well, some things not so well. But I remember in one time I was in graduate school and my son was like 3, and I remember him doing something. I remember hearing myself say to him what was so absolutely my mother's voice. And I realized, oh my Lord, that didn't feel good then. That doesn't feel good now. So I think you're going to have opportunities if you're gentle with yourself. What Siegel has said, Dan Siegel has said that, and others who work in the field of attachment, is that if you've got difficult stuff from your past, your kids are going to bring it up. The 2 ways to not have yourself do what I was doing in kind of voicing my mom's not so great voice in that moment is that if you remember what it was that happened that wasn't good, and you remember what it felt like, That's a really important part, because if we don't remember what it felt like, we may even tell ourselves, well, it was right. That's what should have happened. Yeah, that happened to me, but I was a bad kid. But if we remember what it felt like, and then the third piece, if we can, and we can't always do this as openly as we might want to, but the third piece is then to share that with somebody. Share it with your partner. Share it, if no one else, share it with the sky. Share it with your dog. Share it, to say that was hard. Because once we have the memory and the emotion connected with what was difficult that happened to us, we are far less likely to repeat it in our interactions with our kids. So I mean, when those things get triggered within us, I guess there is some obligation to say, where's that coming from? By being so difficult. I see parents who have lots of fear reactions activated by their kids. And, when a parent is experiencing too much fear, and the child sees the parent really, really apprehensive about whether, when they're little, if it's about whether or not they're walking on the wall that they could fall off and get hurt by, or when they get older, are they going to go to a party and get raped? Or, they're just all the
worst case scenario.
Worst case scenarios. And when the kids see our fear, they do one of two things. Or maybe they do both. They absorb it and then they defend against it. So they see it, they feel it, they experience it as an expression of a lack of belief in them, belief in the universe, the world, very place. And fear it inhibits kids' ability for creative and flexible thinking. It creates anxiety that compromises cognitive efficiency. As parents, if we I don't think most of us have ever loved anything as much as we love our kids. And all of a sudden, when you love something that much, the thought of letting them down or losing them, heaven forbid, is more than most of us are ready to deal with. And so it can elicit a fear in us. And I think to love someone that much does bring up, and have that much responsibility, it brings up fear. But we got to manage that fear in a way that we don't express it back to the child, because it will inhibit the child's ability to develop as fully and as flexibly as we want them to.
Okay, so that's interesting. So, and I mean, in my own family, I would say that my husband is like, I feel like much more on that, and reactive in that way than I am. And I mean, how do you, I think it's hard to, obviously you need to teach safety. You need to kind of have limits to where they can climb, or, who they can play, all that stuff. So, and it's one of those things where it's like the risk might be small, but the
cost
the cost would be huge. So how do you kind of, I mean, I do feel like it's a lot about your feelings more than that, like rational calculation, but it's hard to, when there is that like potential really bad thing, I think it's hard to like counter rationally.
Well, the dilemma is that the more frightened we are by it, the less our kids are going to be able to listen to us. They're going to need to shut us out. I have my wife, who I love dearly, and she made me into a much better parent than I would have been without her help. But with our grandkids, she worries about, we're outside, and she's always, my grandson, who's very active and loves to climb on walls or climb things. And, and she has to work so hard at not just being a litany of concerns. So part of what we've done also, because he gets annoyed by it too, because he says, Mimi, I'm okay. He's 6 years old. I'm okay. I know what I'm doing. But we've worked at teaching him to say, Mimi, thank you for loving me, but I'm okay. So framing it as it is the expression of her love, but he also has the ability to push back on it and say, I've got some agency here and I've got some abilities here. So I think there are lots of different ways to manage it, but just to know that as a parent, your fears is complicated. And some of it, you fake it until you make it. I mean, that's part of what you're doing, is because you know that if your child sees your fear, it's going to increase theirs, and they're either going to become more reticent to take the chances necessary, or they're going to block out your voice altogether and just become, more reckless in their decision making.
Interesting. And so, so I'm sort of getting a picture of like I don't know, like different types of triggers. Like the first one that you talked about, like when you were repeating what your mom said, and like that seems very direct, and you can remember the situations in your own childhood, you can remember what it felt like, and then hopefully share it. But with something like fear, I feel like it might be just more like a general anxiety that you have. Like it's not necessarily like your parents were overly fearful of you climbing in the tree. So what do you do when it's like kind of not one-to-one kind of correlation?
I think there are a few different things you can do. I mean, I think that you first of all, you recognize it. And, if your child's giving you cues, it says, Mom, they're just, when there are ways in which the child is seeming to pull away from you in response to your warnings or your caution. Well, then you got to go, all right, I need to figure this out. I need to manage it in a different way. I think that, one of the things, you'll oftentimes have partners, they'll have kind of different risk, comfort levels. And so you can work with your partners around that. You can be playful about it. I mean, with the child, in the sample I used with my grandson, the main thing that was mitigating his grandma's fear was playfulness. It was his ability to say, Grandma, I know you love me. You're a little neurotic, so okay. And Grandma's ability to just, give him the eye in response to that. Well, be careful or whatever. You've moved away. You've moved away from a dynamic that has this kind of intensity. So I think that playfulness, whenever possible, talking to kids about it, saying, I know I get worried about that, and I know that when you're every time you go down to the swimming pool, I know that I ask you 3 times whether or not you have your life jacket, or I know you're figuring that out. I know you don't need me to do that all the time. Just to own some of that and talk about it. Talk about it like something that there's an awareness, because the more you talk about it, the more you say, I know you got that, the more the child is going to have a story about themselves in their own mind that says, I've got that. They are to live that story out. Interesting.
But it does sound like a lot of it all starts with kind of the parent being like, oh, wait a minute, maybe this is too strong. Maybe this isn't really about my child. Maybe it's about me. Like,
my child's reaction to it is not good.
How do you kind of get parents to get there? Because I feel like a very, more common than not, where like my reaction is completely legitimate. They are out of line. And, so how do you even start to realize like, oh, maybe this is coming from my past, not from the present?
I think rarely does it actually happen in the moment that you have that insight. I think it's like as you're lying in bed trying to go to sleep and you're reviewing some exchange that you had with a child that you didn't like. I had one with my granddaughter not long ago, and and I lied in bed that night. She's 4 years old, and it was, she looked me in the eyes and said, no, I'm not getting down from these bleachers that had signs say, don't get on the bleachers.
You were right.
Looked me in the eyes and said, no. And I didn't manage this gracefully. I mean, I didn't yell at her or anything, but I said, well, then I'm going to pick you up. And then she started to struggle. And instead of just sitting down on the ground there and helping her, I carried her back to the car. It was not a good choice. I was locked into a power struggle with her, and I would be damned if I'm going to lose it. I do think that one of the variables that really avoid power struggles with kids to your absolute best ability. But I do also believe that if you get locked into one, you kind of need to win it, unless you discover while you're in it, this is crazy. I'm crazy. I'm pursuing this. So it's this delicate balance that, you don't want to get into power struggles you can't win, because then then it sets the stage for this child to struggle with you more. But by the same token, you get down the pathways of a power struggle and you go, this is stupid. Why did I do this? Well, then you sometimes have to stop and not move into a negotiation with a child, because negotiation is not a good recovery from a power struggle. Because negotiation says we've gone from dad or mom being here to the youngster being here in a power struggle. I'm going to win this power struggle. And now you start negotiating. The child becomes your peer in a negotiation. And that's not good. It's not, because the child's security, both emotional and real security, is based upon the child being in a subordinate role. So I'm not big on negotiation, and a lot of people aren't. But I do think that once you find yourself in a situation where you go, this is stupid, you can say, I didn't manage that well, sweetie. You don't know what to do right now. You're just all dug in, and that's all you know. And then, dad or granddad was dug in too. And so, all right, this is what we're going to do. In this case, the only thing that would have worked, you can go play on the dangerous set of bleachers. He is very determined. There could have been another option. There had to be.
Well, I was going to say, I feel like you've talked about this before, like, for example, in the treatment program, and like a kid being like, I'm going to the bathroom, and the teacher was just like, just say please, or something like that. That feels like a little bit, it is negotiating, but it's kind of also finding win-win. We should really...
You hold a little bit of your authority.
Yeah. I feel like we should also talk about negotiation sometime, because I feel like I negotiate a lot, and it doesn't bother me. Like, I feel like it's like finding a solution that's better for all of us.
I think negotiation is fine as long as the kid hasn't drawn a hard line on you and they say no.
Right.
If you go into it and say, let's negotiate a solution here, that's great. That's nothing wrong with it. I know you don't want to go, but let's talk about how that's absolutely fine. I think that's good parenting. That's what Washington talk about as collaborative problem solving. Absolutely. Okay. But that is different from a child who's drawn a hard line, and now you enter into a process of negotiating as to how to get them to move out of that stance. And in those moments, you don't want to negotiate. I think it's fine to say, I'm going to let you do what you want. It's fine to say a lot of different ways out of it.
Yeah.
Because you know what? I just put you in a position you didn't know how to manage, sweetie.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think I had a situation like that yesterday where I said, okay, do what you want.
This is no battle, I shouldn't, and taking some responsibility as a parent, saying, I kind of got us in here as much as you did. So I'm now going to be the one. So I'm going to say, okay, I let go of the tug of war. That's okay. If you do it and you're not seeming undone or angry or frustrated, then you hold on to your power. You do it and you act resented with resentment or hurt, giving up your power.
Interesting. So now we're back to like how triggered you are, right? Because if you like have felt like it's a power battle and you are losing, or you don't like how it came out, then that comes from probably somewhere that you need to be in control, right?
I would say yes. On the topic of parent, feel it to heal it. That's the wonderful thing about having friends and partners and loved ones around. Was the process of going back and talking about it, going back and saying, "This happened. I don't feel good about it," is sometimes really important to encourage or teach whoever you're talking to not give you advice.
Okay.
It's usually not great. That's what we want. And sometimes people say, my wife will say to me pretty regularly, I want to talk to you about something. I want to tell you something, but I just want you to listen. And I go, okay, all right, good. That's not always my gift.
That's your profession though.
Well, yeah, it is. That's, she's sometimes bewildered by that fact.
So actually I want to go into this in more detail. Like how can parents get support with these triggers. And so you've talked about this process of remember what happened, remember what it felt like, and then hopefully share it. So I would love to know what's magic about that, like how that works, and then maybe talk about different ways to share it.
Yeah, I mean, I think from the magic is that those things that happen to us that were very difficult oftentimes get kind of split off from our conscious awareness, and they're held in the lower right limbic system. They're sometimes the language is a little different, but kind of the unconscious. But that's where that stuff is. And when it comes up, and we have the experience of being able to identify it, to see it, it's no longer just a feeling. It's now an awareness of a feeling. That means that we're kind of observing it as well as experiencing it. When we're able to do that, we're starting the process of moving into an integrated response to that old hurt. And that integrated response means bringing it up. Lou Cozolino talks about this. He said, you bring it up from the lower right, then somebody shows up there with you. They match your emotion. And then you walk together over the left hemisphere where you create a story, a narrative about it, where language is in the left hemisphere. So the power is first just this thing that's got its own energy in the machine language down there that all of a sudden we're aware of it. We become more aware of it, more able to observe it. And then if we can actually find someone. Now, sometimes, as I said before, that someone, if there isn't somebody readily available who gets it, who makes you feel felt, then sometimes you have to do it in a way that you take it to your spiritual sense of self. You take it to your dog. Literally, you take it to nature.
Or a journal.
Or a journal. Yes, thank you. You take it to a journal because the journal is all about moving it into a narrative. The journal has words, so that's. Yeah, so there are different ways to do it, and there's no one way. And depending on the circumstances, you got to do you got to work with what you got in the moment.
What happens if you share it with somebody who's not a good listener? Either they dismiss it or they give you advice or stuff like that. What happens then? Our
response to sometimes we talk about an empathic miss. Somebody thinks that they're giving us something helpful, but it just goes by. I talk about, my dad died last week and they come along. Yeah, gosh, my cat died a year and a half ago. Oh, wait a minute. Those are, maybe not. There are maybe some people who are deeply, deeply connected with their cats, but when there's a miss or somebody says something where they just want to have somebody feel them, just not be alone with it. And the person starts talking about ways to fix it. It's almost as they start talking about how to fix it. They move into their left brain, and my poor little right brain just kind of shrinks back and goes down and is lost there. I see that happen with parents bringing kids into therapy. They'll sit down and start talking about the child's behavior, inner world. And I just see these kids just get smaller and smaller because they feel so alone. It's not just judgment and all, but it's just so alone. So I think that the process of having somebody who doesn't get you, somebody who has this empathicness, I think what typically happens is that whatever it was that was coming up towards conscious awareness, making its way up, just goes back down. It just drops back.
You feel kind of like re-wounded or
Exactly, and alone with that thing. So teaching our partners, our friends, even our therapists sometimes what we need to not feel alone with something. There's pretty good evidence that males tend to want to fix things. We're a little less inclined to just be. Not that that's exclusively the realm of males, but it is something you hear often from females who are loved by males, and that it makes them it doesn't work. It doesn't work. And so I think that we oftentimes have to teach our partners. I was saying my wife will sometimes say very clearly, I don't want your suggestion. I just want you to listen to this with me. And I can.
I feel like it's hard. It's counterintuitive that would be valuable. Maybe I'm more on the solution oriented side of things as well, but it sort of just seems like, just raising it, like, what's that going to do?
People come into therapy, and one of the things that they come in is they think they're going to get counseling. They're going to get counseled as to what to do. Now, some of that happens. I don't care how you sell yourself. You are doing some counseling. There's no question. But most of us who are more psychodynamically or attachment informed in our training recognize that far and away the most important thing that we do is we show up and we're present. So I think that, it is undervalued. I think we like to think about, all right, how are we going to fix this thing? And that's a very loving thing to do. That's not an unkind thing to do, but it can make somebody feel diminished and alone.
And what about when, now I'm like flip-flopping and, to an advocate of like just even more pure feeling. What about when putting it into a narrative is like even more cognitive than is needed? I mean,
You've talked to me about this a little bit before, Kate, and I think that that's true. I think that if you were to ask me in a conversation where there's some important affective content that needs to be dealt with, somebody needs some help with, it should be 90% feeling it together and 10% creating a little bit of a story. Because even if you can't create a story that, what I'll find with a number of my patients who are not comfortable in bringing up emotion, they can bring it up and I can stay with them with the emotion. But as soon as I start to try to create a narrative to it, they don't want it. They don't, no, that's not quite it. That's not, instead of kind of where somebody who is a little more comfortable with that, they'll say, well, no, that's not quite it, but this is kind of it. Maybe this and that, and you work together to you co-create a narrative about it. Where I think that you can find, if you have to choose or time is limited, just be with the emotion. Just help that person feel felt, and that is the hardest and probably the most important aspect of supporting someone with a difficult emotional reality.
Yeah. So two questions about that. Like, what I guess again on kind of two different ends of the spectrum. One is like, what about when people have a narrative about like, oh, this happened to me in my childhood and I react like this, and so that's why I'm like this, and it just kind of seems to stay in that narrative and it doesn't change like how they feel or how they behave?
Well, I mean, I can tell you how that's dealt with in a therapy session, but the thing is, therapy is just a relationship. So if you're talking about therapy, what works in therapy, the same thing works in a loving relationship with somebody, for the most part. Now, if they sense that you're now acting like a therapist, they'll ask you to leave, but a good therapist doesn't act too much like a therapist. They listen a lot. So I think that when somebody has a narrative that they've kind of just, they've almost truncated any effort to understand the affect or the emotion below it. Well, this is who I am. I'll hear that often. I'm just kind of bossy. Always been bossy. And that process of, we use something, Dan Hughes coined the phrase, the affective reflective dialogue. It means that you reflect back to someone the underlying emotion associated with what they're saying. So it might mean somebody says, well, I'm just always bossy. People always tell me I'm bossy. Being able to go, oh, that can't feel good. They're trying to connect an emotion with because with that, you can then oftentimes move back and connect it with other emotion. So it's just reflecting an affect. And the affect may not be accept it. I might say that, and they might say, "No, I'm glad. I'm fine with it. It's always been good. It's worked for me." And then I have to be very careful about going, "No, you're really sad about it." That's not going to work. But it doesn't mean that I haven't kind of put a pin in the idea that there's something there that at some point we want to help understand better. So I'm not suggesting that all relationships are therapy relationships, or all therapy relationships are just, simple, caring relationships. But there's not a whole hell of a lot of difference. Carl Whitaker, who was a family therapist, who died a number of years ago, just a wonderful, fascinating guy. Yeah, he referred to marriage in his day. It was marriage. It now could just be long-term partnerships as well. But he said it's an endeavor in long-term co-therapy. We're trying to help each other figure out the things that have gotten complicated in our lives, and that stop us from being able to kind of more fully be ourselves, and not a self that was defined by some adaptive needs to factors.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so when in that example that you were just giving about the person who says, I've always been bossy. I mean, it sounds like you can get to a point where you have kind of a narrative about where these things came from, but then you're using that to avoid the feelings. Like, so when you say, ow, that must really hurt. Like, I can see that person be like, I don't know. I guess where I'm coming at is that you as a therapist, your job is to kind of like help people get to those feelings, and you can do that by reflecting them. If a parent, doesn't have you, and they're just kind of like taking these situations with their child, I mean, I just feel like we do a lot to try and avoid our feelings, and there's so many different ways that we can do it.
I hear what you're saying, Kate. I mean, I think that the parent and parents, many parents come into parenting with a story about who they are, what they're going to know how to do, and what they're not going to know how to do. I'm not going to, I have a family member who refers to herself as my sister. She'll be fine with it, I think. We'll see. She ever snaps me. She describes herself as somebody she loves working with kids or with teenagers. She was a high school English teacher, and I think a very good one. And she always knew that she wanted to work with teenagers, and she loved working with kids. But I just don't really get and enjoy working with little kids or being with little kids. I know where that came from. We shared a mom. But I don't think that narrative helped her. I don't think it helped her find some of the joy that she wanted to in the process of parenting little ones. She was not abusive. She was not neglectful. But that narrative was always kind of there, kind of waiting for the kids to get a little older. Easier.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like my mom had a narrative that was like, oh, I don't know how to deal with a girl. And so, that is, whoops.
Oops. Yeah. Sorry, Mom.
Sorry, daughter.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. Sorry to inflict this on you by my existence.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. So I feel like if we have a message here, it's sort of like, if things are going wrong with your kids, like, look, try to figure out what it is in yourself, and then your 3 helpful steps in terms of like remembering what happened, remembering what that felt like, and sharing it. We didn't kind of talk about this when you said it, but I do think that's interesting that when you just remember what happened without remembering what it felt like, you might repeat it. I mean, there's so many people who say like,
there's a lot of evidence to suggest you are much more likely to repeat it.
Yeah, I mean, people who are like, well, I turned out okay, despite having been spanked or, having very harsh discipline or high standards or whatever it is. And is that really from the not remembering how it felt?
Yes. That would be my simple answer to that. You know, it's a semantic issue, but that's what a lot of the attachment literature and interpersonal neurobiology literature would suggest as well.
Mm-hmm. So it's a constant struggle between like the voice that's kind of telling us there might be something more to look at, and the voice that's saying, "Oh no, I'm just fine. Look outside for the problems." And that's what we get to deal with on top of getting lunches ready and meeting our deadlines at work and cleaning the house and all that kind of stuff.
All that kind of stuff. It's a lot. It's a lot. And so, you know, where we started, Kate, it's a good place to end. Just be gentle with yourself. Oh my Lord. You know, have a little sense of humor. Just be kind to yourself, and you're trying. You know, that doesn't mean that you don't try to figure stuff out, but you're going to make mistakes. And, you know, the old notion about the good enough parent, the research on looking at how little apes responded to different parenting styles, that it was the mom ape who was attentive, but not overly attentive, who really produced the most flexible and adaptive child.
Oh, well, that's good news. So parents have to make some mistakes so that their kids can like learn resilience and
absolutely. My kids, when our kids were young, their mom and I used to say that sometimes playfully when they were mad at us. And say, you know, our objective is just to be good enough. And they would assure us that we weren't.
That is helpful. Yeah. And also I just think always the concept of repair and transparency and kind of like working through these things with your kids is
absolutely.
Without giving them the brunt of your emotions.
Yeah. All right.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much. This is another fascinating topic, and we'll be back for more soon.
You keep finding them, Kate.
They show up.
They show up. All right, you take good care. Okay.
Thanks so much. Have a good week. Bye.